I really do think and bringing it back full circle, it is that a questionnaire is really giving you any real value in terms of the security of that company.
Welcome back to Threats, Pitfalls, and Risk Myths, the TPRM Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Lee. And today, I'm going to be joined by Mike Johnson. He is a longtime security leader and one of the original security podcasters whose career spans a diversity of roles, including running detection and response for early Salesforce, as well as being the CISO of Lyft, Fastly, and now Rivian. He's had a front row view into how modern security has evolved as it moved to the cloud before building early hyperscale consumer-facing systems. He's secured critical internet-scale infrastructure, and now he's leading the charge, securing the next generation of software-defined vehicles. We're going to talk about the real challenges behind third-party risk, how AI is changing both attacks and detection, why security teams need to start treating their data as a big data problem, and why the dreaded security questionnaire completely misses the point. Mike brings a grounded, pragmatic perspective shaped by years of hands-on experience. Let's get started. All right, well, welcome to Threats, Pitfalls, and Risk Myths, the TPRM podcast. Today, I'm joined by the one, the only, the Mike Johnson. You're probably, really, we were just talking, you're one of the first security podcasters I ever listened to. You've been doing this for a very long time, so I'm quite honored to have you on here and joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really a great opportunity to maybe capture some of the conversations that you and I have had over the years, and I've really enjoyed all of those. So hopefully, we can capture something here and share with your audience. So thank you for having me on.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. And, especially you just have such a cool, broad sort of history and where you've come up through. We were just talking about you got your start doing network engineering, as did I. But then also, you were doing like detection and response over at Salesforce. And that was kind of early on in the whole SaaS revolution. So really seeing how that stuff got built, doing Lyft, getting to see the kind of scale of the consumer side blowing up really fast, and then doing Fastly, having all the, just the broad network and kind of global reach. And now Rivian, where I'm sure you have like all sorts of unique challenges that I haven't thought of because, you actually make things that are real that you can touch. It's very foreign to me, but so yeah, it's just great to have you on because I think your perspective on all this is fabulous.
Thank you. I really have had some great opportunities to just try out different things. Sometimes was very early on at Salesforce. We had no idea what cloud security was. Like, it wasn't a thing. We were in a way making it up as we were going because it was not defined, and that was really a great experience to be a part of something. And then, as you mentioned, at Lyft, very early days of rideshare and the early days of scaling.
The mustaches were on the cars.
Oh, yes, I actually have one of those around here somewhere. But that was the first introduction to just scaling like crazy. Like, we would have a load at a certain level, and then on Friday night, the infrastructure had to basically grow 10x and then spin back down Saturday morning. And it was just these wild swings of scaling that was necessary. And then Fastly, it was, we're just going to run at, 100 terabytes at any point in time. And that's just normal. Like, yeah, we'll just sling that much data around, and that's a normal thing. So again, a different kind of scale. And then ultimately at Rivian, we're now trying to scale software-defined vehicles, which is a whole different thing of, how do you, to your point, how do you secure a thing that you're touching versus a thing that, it has physical manifestation versus a thing that you can just write a few lines of code and now it has changed. Yeah. It's a very different world for sure.
Yeah, and it's out of your hands. It's out there, and you're kind of taking components from all of these places. That's just stuff that a lot of us coming from the pure software side don't really have to think about. What were some of the biggest changes and adjustments for you coming into that? You have to think about like physical goods and factories, components. The fact that once you send it off to someone, you can't be like, oh, hey, we need that back. We need to make some changes. Like, were there any unique things that really kind of took you when you started that you had to think about?
As I was coming in, I had a whole lot of conversations to really understand how we think about securing the vehicles. When I was talking with friends of like, hey, I'm going to go join Rivian. They make software-defined vehicles. Every security professional I talked to said, that sounds terrifying. Oh my, why would I want a software-defined vehicle? But if you're designing these physical things with security in mind to begin with, that you know that this is going to be out in the world, you're going to need to be able to update it. You're going to need to be able to fix it. And as long as you start with that secure by design perspective, then you're shipping these physical things that you actually can fix on the fly. And that was really a different perspective for me. And that predated me. That was something that really sound engineers created at Rivian well before I joined. And it was one of the things that attracted me to, of like, that's some good thought, like really being thoughtful about how we're going to do that. And so that gave me a lot of comfort of like, hey, this is something pretty cool. This is something I want to be a part of.
Are there takeaways that you have that like others who don't have that as sort of a forcing function? Because I guess, I mean, there's still ways you can screw it up, but it certainly makes it easier to say, like, we need to do this right from the get-go, or this is clearly going to bite us. Are there things that you learned just from seeing how it evolved at Rivian that would be sort of useful to companies where you don't have that as again, like the forcing function to say, we need to do this?
I think it really then comes back to the fact that it's a lot cheaper to get it done with that in mind in the first place than to come back and do it later. Mm-hmm. And that's a conversation that security leaders can go and have and stress to engineering leaders of like, hey, if we design this right the first time and or make it so that if we get it not perfect the first time, that we can fix it. One of the things we were talking about before we got started was the networking background and that need for resilience. If you are actually building these systems with the idea that something is going to go wrong and you can fix it quickly. A good example is password rotations, like credential secrets rotations.
Yes.
Like everybody, whenever a secret gets committed into source code, there's a whole lot of panic, rightfully so, but a lot of that panic comes back to, man, this is going to be such a pain to rotate. But if you have
to do it,
everybody has to do it. It's inevitable. But if you engineer the system such that you can actually change it pretty easily, then that's not a painful thing. And that's part of the secure by design concept of being ready to fix something when it does go wrong.
Yep. I feel like it's a bit of a battle against much of human nature. You have like the one marshmallow, two marshmallow thing, and you're like, or I could push my code right now and gobble the marshmallow. We'll deal with the second one later, type of thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it's once you kind of can ingrain that in people's brains that, hey, like there are real consequences to doing this, and yes, it might be slightly faster now, but it's just going to keep kicking you over and over again. I mean, I think that ends up being, how do you convey that to engineering groups so that they understand this? And a lot of that, we've talked about this in the past, but having those relationships with people so that you're not just saying, you have to do this because this is for your own good, and really helping them understand. I mean, I think that ends up, getting people more along the lines there.
Yeah, I think if you bring data and examples, like especially in like bonus points, if it's things that you've had to deal with in your own organization, where you can say, hey, this team over there had that problem, and look at how much time it cost them when we saw that. Maybe you should just do this right the first time. And that storytelling can really help out there.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's probably a skill that most of us could use improvement on, and really think about, like, how do you put this in terms of a story? Because like brains are just, going back to psychology, brains are very receptive to hearing things in story format. Makes it much more memorable and sort of impactful. And I think,
here we are today. We're, that's the purpose of the podcast, right? is storytelling.
I love when you mentioned network engineering, and we were talking about, making it so that when things go wrong, I thought for sure you were going to just talk about putting an ACL on something and locking yourself out of a remote router. And I was thinking of all the stories I could tell of doing that myself. And
yeah, I've done that myself too. Yeah, been there, done that.
it's not great. You have to drive somewhere else in your non-electric self-driving car.
Exactly.
Terrible. Well, when it comes to because we've talked a lot about third-party risk management in the past as well. And I think one of the things we talked about is, again, like having that relationship with vendors, especially critical ones, at least. I mean, you can't do this for everybody, but rather than thinking about, assessing vendors as this, you're kind of like, oh, there, and you give them the thumbs up or thumbs down, making it more of a relationship where you can understand where they're at and make sure they understand your needs and your requirements. Rather than just throwing whatever people do with questionnaires and, give me all your policies or whatever, that there's no way anyone's reading that or making sense of it. And they're not you, so they don't really know what's going on.
It's an area where I think as an industry, we've over pivoted. It's not to say that third-party risk management is not important. It is. It absolutely is. But because we didn't know how to solve it, we just said, hey, we're just going to add questionnaires. We'll just ask them about their security. And it's funny when you talk in security circles about that and you quickly get into, well, I can't trust their answers. So why are you asking the questions? Like if you're sending out these questionnaires to your vendors and you're just assuming that they're going to lie to you, and I've absolutely had that conversation with other CISOs who they just assume that, well, they're going to lie to me. Why are you doing it? So I really think that there's got to be something better than just sending out questionnaires. Ideally, it is a relationship. I don't know how you scale that, but that would be an ideal.
I sense a thing for AI here.
Isn't that the thing?
Only mostly not joking.
Yeah, I know that one of the early uses of AI has been parsing questionnaire responses and also answering questionnaires that come in. And so to my mental image of this is I'll have my bot talk to your bot. And I don't know if that's a great outcome either.
No, it's answering the wrong question at kind of the higher level, right? Because it always depends on the specifics of whatever engagement, like what data are they going to have? What integrations are there? What's the broader risk? All of those things. And the, at least the questionnaires I see are so generic and, mildly entertaining for the first 40 or 50 of them as I'm looking through and reading about which type of fire suppression system do I have? And I'm very positive that whoever's reading this knows the difference between Halon and whatever the other thing is.
And not Halon.
And non-Halon. And as I'm reading these, I'm kind of entertained, and then that entertainment slowly fades into deep annoyance the deeper I go into these things. But yeah, I mean, without the context of what are you trying to secure? What's the criticality of the data? What can go wrong? Doing the threat modeling on it and having it as a discussion, then, I mean, it just seems like it literally, in most cases, is so that if something goes wrong, we need to be able to say that we asked a bunch of questions.
Yes. Yeah. It really is that trap of due diligence, right? Of being able to say, hey, we've done our due diligence. And you do have to do that. You can't just act like you're living in the YOLO world of security.
Yeah, the developers are doing that now with writing code. So somebody needs to hold the fort down.
Yes, we'll go YOLO mode in other areas, but maybe not in TPRM. On the other hand, I think it's really a matter of what are the outcomes that we're concerned about. And you made the point about threat modeling and thinking about the data. That really has you move away from just painting with a broad brush, that every vendor is the same. If you don't know what data is at risk, you're pivoting too hard in one direction or the other. You're either leaning too far in, and I've known security programs in the past way better funded than I've been, of they just penetration test all of their vendors and they pay a third party to go do that. Okay, if you can do that, that's great. But that feels like it's too far in a direction.
Well, and still isn't it's hitting the application itself, but maybe everyone inside is an admin and has no MFA. A pen test isn't going to find that. It's still a massive thing you would want to know about.
It's a great point. It is a very focused evaluation of a security program versus what is supposed to be a broad of the questionnaire is going to tell you everything about a security program. And that's also not working out very well for us.
Yeah. And I think, to the point of people worried about customers or vendors going to lie to you, if you send out 300 questions, the odds of that happening are just so much higher, because there's going to be things that they don't have, and they're trying to close a deal. They're like, oh, if they dig into this, I guess we'll get more and we'll figure it out. Versus if you had, done the research, figured out what's actually important here, and narrow it down to something more tailored. Much harder to lie when someone asks you 5 really pointed questions about things that are really important than 300 where you can slide in all sorts of random things. I think I've put Easter egg answers in and never been called out on it. So
did you ever do the brown M&M question or answer?
No.
So that was a thing where I can't remember which band it was, but they had it in their contract.
Oh yeah, the attention to detail type of thing.
Exactly, like you sneak in an answer just to make sure that somebody's actually reading them.
Yeah, that's I did that a couple of times. I'm like, all right, no one's reading these, and I'm like, what are we even doing here? Yeah. But it's part of the sales cycle, and you're on the vendor side. You just have to deal with it. So for those of you sending questionnaires to people, know that this is what's going through the other party's mind as they read your 300 questions. And I think, to your point, you can't manage thousands and thousands of vendors in that same way. You can't have a relationship with them. It's not helpful necessarily to have that big broad brush where you're asking every question to everyone just in case, because, what can you even do with that anyway? Is there something that to you is the, maybe minimum viable security, or a reasonable sounding security program that hey, here's our low water mark that you have to be at least this tall to be a vendor? Do you guys have something like that, or is it something you think about?
So setting aside, what we do as part of my company that I work for, but just, conceptually, I think it is, if you have gone through the effort of a certification for your program, be that SOC 2 or ISO or what have you, that effort that you've put into it, whether or not you hold SOC 2 to some high standard, the company has put the effort in. They are willing to show their program to an outside auditor of some sort. And so I think a company deserves credit for that. That is, I think it's a minimum viable. If you have a recognized certification of your program done by an external auditor who's willing to sign it, I do think that counts as, you're doing okay. Yep. Now, for certain use cases, back again to your point about threat modeling and what is the data at hand, that's not going to be good enough for everything, but that might help a company manage the scale of their vendor ecosystem, where they can really manage the ones that matter and lean in on those. And maybe those are the ones that you do have that relationship with. But for everything else, it's hey, do you pass the minimum bar? Great. That, for the threat that we're worried about with you, that's fine.
Yeah. I think that's, right now, at least, that is kind of the only thing you can do that's scalable is kind of have that minimum bar. And obviously SOC 2 has, Amazon SOC 2 is going to be very different than somebody's first time SOC 2 and their 20-person startup or something.
Yep.
There's obviously wide ranges of differences, but it does say something that the company is, if they're smaller, they're getting mature enough that they're even thinking of this. They've put the money towards it. Assumedly, they're paying someone to run it internally, and that person is responsible enough that they're going to be making sure the things are happening, because they know next year's audit's coming somewhere around the corner.
Yeah, it's always, next year's audit is always coming.
Always around the corner. Yeah, I've definitely had places the audit's over. I'm like, that is not exactly how that works, but
get ready for the next one.
Appreciate your optimism.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate your optimism.
Well, and one of the things with it, maybe slightly differently, but still related to third parties, we had the Shah Halud, the NPM worm, where they'd sort of compromised some people's packages on NPM. And there was the React vulnerability, which was just a regular old vulnerability that happened to be an RCE. Everybody is super reliant on third-party software, whether it's external services or libraries you're pulling in. How do you think about this more generally? So for your own teams, how do you make sure they're ready to deal with incidents? Making sure they don't end up too far back where they're 3 major versions back and now there's an RCE and they can't update. other things that you do when it comes to working with engineering teams to make sure, they're aware of what can happen and they're ready for things like this?
Some of it is just hygiene. Like, are you really think about the hygiene of your environment? Are you able to update? Are you able to patch when something comes out? It's not that you necessarily need to always be rushing for it, but if you're 3 versions behind at any point in time, that's probably too far. And we do track and pay a lot of attention to N-1, N-2 as some of those thresholds for across the board. Now, all of that comes back to, and it's something that I think a lot of folks in security don't spend enough of time on, is inventory. You have to know what you have in order to know if it's 5 versions behind. If you don't know that it's there, you have no idea if it's on the correct version. So I really think that's one of the key controls for security is inventory, and then
making sure they're queryable.
Yes.
Yeah, because then you could at least see, okay, where are we using, like in this most recent React one, I think it was 19 something, whatever the newest version is. A lot of the teams I talked to were on 18, some were on 19, and being able to actually find that quickly is the difference between, it could be hours of letting your service sit there when there's a known kind of exploitable and being exploited vulnerability kind of sitting out in the world.
I think that was an interesting one in that you really did have widespread scanning started quickly. And then I think it was Amazon who reported that there were nation state actors who were attempting to exploit that. It was a very quick turnaround, and knowing where you stand really gives you a chance on being able to do something about it before the compromise happens.
Yep. And I think, to me at least, it seems like that is going to be the new normal, because with AI-based tools, it's too easy to weaponize a vuln. You can just go see in this case, I think there was a proof of concept released, but even if not, you can see the code, you can point Claude Code at it and, reverse engineer a vulnerability or exploit for it with near zero friction, where before, someone had to wait for that to get there and, be out in the world and shared. Now everyone can kind of custom craft their own. So, it's something I've been talking to a lot of people about. I'm not sure exactly where I land, but there's kind of now this dichotomy of, do you patch right away as stuff comes out so you prevent this, or if you patch right away, now you end up with the Shai-Hulud worm, which no one realizes it's out. You put it on your system right away because you have it on automatic or whatever. And how do you think about that balance there?
I think you have to have a proxy in the middle of it all. You have to have your own internal repositories that you are making sure has the correct versions in it to your standard. Your standard, it's very reasonable to say, hey, our standard is N-1. We're not always going to be on the latest, but we will be no more than 1 version behind.
Yep.
And that's something that you can actually scale, right? And that's also something that says we're intentionally choosing N-1. We're not going to be on N unless there is a big vulnerability that we need to move on very quickly. Having that infrastructure where you have that internal repository that you curate and make sure that what comes into it has had some level of vetting, then you can move very quickly on your internal patching. If you can do YOLO mode internally, pointing at your own repository, because what's in your repository is safe. And then everything else can just be constantly trying to update, and those pipelines running and grabbing the known good package at any point in time. And then your investment is upstream in making sure that what gets in there is actually in a good state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, it seems like, again, with things moving so much faster, weaponizing and things like that, right now, N-1, meaning N-1 major version, I'm assuming, but looking at even N-2 days or 3 days or whatever, because I think most of the ones we've seen with supply chain, it ends up someone finds it fairly quickly because, it's going out to 1 million people. And even just that little buffer of not taking them right away, but having automated pick them up later could be a thing. It's interesting to see how this evolves just based on how people are using this and how the threat sort of materializes for everyone.
Yeah, and I think it's your point earlier of, do you are you always patching so that you've always got the latest, or are you always running a little bit behind so that you're not getting that supply chain compromise that's out there? Kind of sucks to have this job and try and make those decisions, right? You can't have.
You want to shoot your foot or your elbow?
Right. There's which foot, do you want to take out? And that's our world these days is,
yep.
Things used to be a lot easier. In my day, things were a lot easier.
They were, because I think we just didn't patch back in the day. It was like a thing you kind of occasionally did when someone reminded you, and it might be years between that, I think. Yeah,
and part of that was because that attack surface didn't exist. Like you couldn't get at that thing, and so you didn't need to worry about it. Now today, your point about the accelerating attacks, I was listening to another podcast, and what the point that was being made was we're very soon entering into a space where everything is being attacked at all times. Like where you can weaponize a vulnerability that can then be targeted at the entire internet at internet speed, you can't really hide behind, well, no one's going to find this thing. Like that just doesn't exist anymore.
And even like automated chaining of them, like it's not even, if it's a layer back, it's like the things, if they can try without rest, are going to be able to figure out this stuff that otherwise you could say like no one's going to be incentivized to do that. That's just not a thing. And now, well, for 48 cents, for less than the price of a cup of coffee.
Well, it's actually interesting that so there's the initial access broker market today where people will go and buy a username and password and then use that to compromise a company. I wonder if we are going to enter into this world where it's like, I will sell you this this foothold that I have in this network that I got through this vulnerability that I was able to rapidly exploit. And so,
and I think that's already happening. Not necessarily from firsthand knowledge, of course, but
well, so if it is happening, there's a cost that's associated with that, and in this world, those costs go down. Where there's that many more footholds, the cost for any one foothold goes down, and maybe that then becomes a measure of how we're doing as an industry. Of are we able to turn that
That's a good point.
To the point where the costs go back up.
I mean, if you look at like the cost for an exploit on like an Android or iPhone or like Chrome and any of the major browsers, I mean, that's a very good proxy for where we're at security-wise. I mean, it dropped very low, I think, for a while on some of the phones. And then now the full takeover is like $1 million or more. And it's, 4 different things chained together in some like ridiculous way. It's like watching Lego Masters. You read about how some of this is going. So I think that's actually a really good metric of where things are at.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the few metrics that we have. Again, it's not a metric that we had back in the day because nobody was trying to buy their way into a corporation. But now that we have that is something that maybe we should think more about, of like how can we recognize the costs to the attackers and use that as a proxy for how we're doing.
One of the things, because I think when it comes to like the speed of attacks, right, like things are speeding up, it ends up being tons more data, because now it's like all the stuff where maybe you could have let slide previously. You need to collect more data for the team to be able to detect if something's going on. And I think this is you that said it, and I'm not sure where, I couldn't find it, but I feel like I remember you saying that sort of SIM aggregation is now like it's more of a data problem than a security one. And that's I think it's just super interesting because it's kind of a paradigm shift in how we think about, like that's been a security job in the past and you throw it to people, but now it's like such a big data problem. You can't just expect your average security engineer is going to know sort of, how do we manage this? How do we turn it into something useful? First, was that you? And secondly, what do you think of that?
It's certainly something that I have said. Whether or not I do not claim to be the only person who has thought this, so you may have.
I'll ascribe this straight over to you, though.
Thank you. I'm honored, but I really do think that we have reached the point. If you're ingesting 10 terabytes of data a day like that, and that's not an unreasonable amount of data for a modern security pipeline to be dealing with. first you have to move all that data around. You have to make sense of it. And then you have to figure out how to store it and then make sense of it in aggregate. Like there's the streaming analysis of this is coming in, this atomic log record is telling me, hey, something's wrong. I need to go do something. And then there's this happened, and then this happened, and this other thing didn't happen, and this third thing happened a day later. And that's now something that I need to worry about. Being able to run that analysis at that scale that's growing at that rate, it's a big data problem. It's the same challenge that you would have if you are ingesting network events, like, how's the network doing? Or if you are trying to understand how your listeners are, like, what is their favorite podcast episode? Like, you're having to comb through a lot of data to figure that out. So much data. And like those are big data problems. And we really need to be thinking of security data as just data and leveraging all of those paradigms that have already been built. And you bring those data scientists into looking at security data. And that really gives you an opportunity to do something with all of this that you're collecting, because it's just going to get more. Like there's never going to be a time of, oh, well, I'm now collecting less security data. Like, you have more today than you had yesterday, and you'll have more tomorrow than you have today.
Otherwise, you have a very different problem to be dealing with.
Yes. If you have less data today, then maybe you need to go and look and see what happened that you ended up with less data.
I don't see any alerts here. We should be good.
That's fine. It's fine. But I really do think like the opportunities to learn from the data scientists, bring some of them into security, to train some of your security engineers on data analysis at scale, and build up a capability within your security team to think about these as big data programs, and to build the infrastructure. I have this habit of 3 out of my last 4 companies, I've built a SIM. And that's not to say, hey, I've gone out and tried to replicate what Splunk does. I've built a data platform with streaming pipelines and analysis on top of it, because it's the only way that I've been able to scale with the data that's coming in. And I really think that would help security programs more if they would think about a security data problem as a data problem and not a security problem.
And it seems like something you have to bring in data folks to kind of at least kick that off. Like you're not going to hand a data book to your security engineers and kind of get the same outcome, I'm guessing.
I mean, you can do that. It's just going to take longer.
But it's a whole field.
Yes. I mean, we have smart people on our teams. They can learn that. But if you go ahead and get some help from your data teams, like pretty much any company who has a security team also has a data team. Yeah. And they would love to help you with your data problem. So take them.
I'm sure they're not busy. They'll be
they're absolutely busy, but they would also love to tackle the problem. Like it's something novel for them. And who knows, you might get some internal mobility. Like you might have somebody move from a data team onto a security team.
Yeah. I mean, it is, I'm sure, very interesting once you get into it and kind of figure out where the patterns are. And there's just a lot to unearth there that probably hasn't been given a lot of good look before. So a lot of good stuff to do. Like when you were doing that, because it sounds like you were very ahead of the curve, because now, everybody understands you need to throw stuff into data lake and then sort of deal with it from there, as opposed to put it in Splunk and start writing detections. I mean, were there things that you learned along the way that, that were really key that would be helpful to others that haven't gone this path before?
The biggest problem is normalization. Like every different security log source is going to call a source IP address something different. And it's going to be a source IP.
Capitalized, some have an underscore.
It's going to be crazy. It's amazing the number of different permutations that's a
very hard computer science problem.
And so the first step is really to normalize the data. And once you get all of your data into a normalized catalog of data, your detection engineering is made much simpler. You're able to say, I just want to know any event that comes from an IP address that is in this list of bad IPs of known bad VPN services. That's all. Like, the logic is that simple versus I need to parse this log record and figure out what a source IP is. And I need to parse this one and that one and the other thing. So that normalization really helps you to.
It just unlocks everything else.
It does. It does. It allows you to scale. You might have a person who's a part-time detection engineer. You might have an entire team, but regardless, having that data in a normalized fashion will enable you to scale, and it really does unlock everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ends up being where most companies are going to have to be when it comes to detection engineering in the not too distant future, especially with, as agents start their proliferation across the infrastructure. I mean, the volume that we're going to be talking about is just going to swamp anything other than an architecture built that way. So definitely something I think everyone needs to be fairly on top of.
To the point of what are we going to be able to do with agents? Again, if you've got a normalized data structure, then you really can throw autonomous agents at it. Like they don't have to try and figure out where this thing is coming from. It's already there. That's solved for them. They're just trying to look for the patterns of, hey, I'm seeing this source a whole lot, or I'm seeing this URL being hit in a way that most of the time I don't see it. And I think that's another unlock that we have coming for us.
I'm excited for where things are going to be in a couple of years. I know there's tons of companies building in the space of like AI SOC and AI detection and response and all of these. And I know there's a lot of hard work to make that really feasible. But when we get there, I mean, just the speed and kind of breadth that it's going to be able to operate at is just, it's going to be a whole different level that, in my mind, puts defenders far ahead of, attackers right now probably have the upper hand. But when defenders are able to actually use the context that we have to see stuff in real time, it's going to be really hard to compete from the outside where you don't have that same context, because, I mean, it's going to be AI versus AI, and whoever has the most context is going to win.
Well, I think you're right. Like, and that word context is what really matters. Like, that is the gold in AI these days, is context. And knowing your own environment is something that generally, your outside AI attacker isn't going to have that. And your inside AI,
they still have to do
will.
Figuring out.
Yeah. And so that context is really going to be that game changer for what defenders can use AI for going forward.
And, I wanted to touch a bit on, because you were doing detection and response over at Salesforce, and their name has come up in breaches this year, but not because Salesforce has been breached. They just had the unfortunate position of being on the receiving end of the keys that were stolen elsewhere, happen to be keys to Salesforce. And so, I was curious because we think about third-party risk and all of the different vendors, and a lot of the risk ends up coming from they have API keys to whatever other critical system. So now it's not just what data do they have that you gave them, but like what data can they access, and then the long tail chain of things there. I was curious just your opinion on how much weight would you put on, like, is it the vendor's job to monitor for, misuse of keys? Or is this something that if I'm someone who has these keys, I should be putting canary keys everywhere so that I can tell when they're breached? Like, where for you does the responsibility lie between me knowing where my keys are and somehow knowing if they're breached versus a vendor saying, hey, your keys are being accessed at, very outside of your normal patterns, and, something's going on here and flagging it for you?
In the Salesforce case, there's really three parties, right? There is, I can't remember the name of the latest one.
Drift one?
Yeah. So we'll use Drift as an example. Like, so you've got Drift in the middle, you've got Salesforce where all the data lives, and you've got the customer of Drift. And each one of these can be doing something to help out with these situations. Like, Drift probably should have better protected those keys. Like, I don't know exactly what they were doing, but I can
safe
guess
assumption there.
I can guess that they could have done a little bit more to protect those keys. I think for the customers, like, the idea of using honey tokens is a great one. Like, why not feed that in? Why not maybe open a second Drift account and feed it a honey token, or if you can do it within your main Drift account and have multiple tokens. I don't know the tool, but if you can have multiple tokens, presumably if they get taken, someone is just running through trying to use all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And all you need is just that one trigger. So I think that's a great idea for customers of these intermediaries that are storing API tokens. Like the customers, that's a detection opportunity for them. And then on the cloud storage side, the destination, they absolutely do this monitoring. Like there was Drift, and then there's a more recent one. That more recent one, Salesforce detected it. Like they saw the bad activity and they actually shut down the integration. The first notifications from whatever this company was were, hey, Salesforce broke us. Like it wasn't like we had a security incident. Like their first notifications were, hey, this thing is broken.
PR team really is in charge of those, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, or they just didn't know.
No, it is.
Like, and they were like, oh, what the heck is going on here? And like, I really think Salesforce handled that one very well. Of their detection said, hey, something weird is going on. They did an evaluation, understand where it was coming from, and they just shut it down. Like they did the right thing. It broke some usage of that application. There were absolutely customers of that application like, what is going on? I'm broken. I can't do whatever. But the right thing was to protect the data. And I think we'll continue to see that, where these cloud providers who are really on top of their game are the ones who are helping to detect these middleware companies who just aren't quite there yet. They're not where they need to be from a maturity perspective.
And is that something you think is it reasonable to ask, maybe not like Salesforce being one of the sort of big tech things, is it reasonable to ask, kind of that middle tier, or even the smaller tier, like, how are you, if I'm giving you API keys, how do you monitor those? And I don't want to just hear like, oh, we have access control and, whatever standard answer you're going to get in the questionnaire. Is it fair to ask, like, are you doing proactive actual, like, how would you know if someone took one of these that wasn't supposed to or gained access? Or is that really sort of a level of sophistication that is going to be fairly limited to the larger corporations?
I think if we had asked this question a year ago, it's very different than the answer today. I think that's
now you have a very real thing to
exactly like it. It's very much. I remember the slogan of the Loft back in the day. It was making the theoretical practical. That's exactly what we're seeing. And when a theoretical attack manifests, we have to change the way that we think about it. Like this is real now. And what I would love to see would be every one of these middleware vendors to have just a note on their website. Like, here's how we think about security, and here's how specifically we protect the API tokens that you give us. Like, that should just be there. And if I'm looking at two different vendors for the same solution, one of them has this and one of them doesn't, I know which one I'm picking. That becomes very easy to deal with. So this becomes a competitive advantage if you really lean into it.
Yep. And I mean, it doesn't seem like it would be particularly difficult to implement. To your point, though, on theoretical versus possible, it is weird because, I mean, I've been thinking this in my head for years when you think about API keys and you're just like, well, this could happen. And I wanted to ask more about it. But I remember thinking to myself, 5 years ago, be like, but this, like, that never seems to be the way anyone ever gets breached. So maybe I'm the crazy one. And I guess I would have been back then. But now it's like, oh, yeah, no, this is actually, you just go and open the treasure chest and then you take that and it's full of keys to everyone else's thing. I mean, it is a little wild that it took this long for someone to figure out that you should really just be attacking the person that has all the keys rather than try to steal them individually.
Yeah, and my suspicion is they had no idea what they were doing at first. Like they didn't set out to gain a repository of OAuth tokens. They landed in an environment. Maybe they got access to the environment for other reasons. And they're like, oh, this is actually
seems likely.
This is a lot more valuable than we thought it was. Let's go do that instead. I don't think
now the cat's out of the bag. And
Oh yeah, and everybody's doing it. Like this is the in vogue attack path.
You only stole one key?
Yeah, right.
Fools.
But I mean, if you go back to like Truffle Hog, where back in the day, there were AWS tokens just sitting in public source code all the time.
Everywhere. I mean, still, I think you can find quite a lot of things out there.
Yeah, I'm sure it still is. But we recognized that was something that we needed to do something about when big breaches started happening. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what it takes. And, there's only so many hours in the day, and you do have to prioritize, that thing that is theoretical just doesn't always come to the top versus that thing that's real.
You just hope you're not part of when it becomes real, and then you can kind of follow on and be like, we've got this. We've got it covered before we were hit. And
hey, we saw this coming, and we just hit the enter key, and we've now implemented our protection.
It's good to go.
Aren't we great?
Yeah, that's about it. I just want to have one last question here, and I was curious, in your mind, what is the biggest risk myth? I know, like, Bob Lord has this whole hack lore thing out, which is amazing, because so many of those things, when you're a security professional, you're just like, yeah, no, you can connect to the Wi-Fi in the coffee shop. It's fine. What, to your mind, is the biggest one that is actually, maybe not in the public, but within the actual field with security professionals thinking?
I really do think and bringing it back full circle, it is that a questionnaire is really giving you any real value in terms of the security of that company. Like, we lean way too hard into the questionnaire. I really think that's something that we need to change as an industry. I don't know that I'll quite make it onto Bob's hack lore list, but it's one of those things that I really think we need to reevaluate as an industry.
I agree 1,000%. Yeah, that one is you're not only inflicting pain on others. I mean, it's sort of sadistic to do, but it doesn't add any sort of value, at least not in the way that people think it is. So yeah, I'm very much there with you.
I think it adds net negative value. Like you're putting in all
time away from.
You're putting all that work into sending out the questionnaire, looking at the answers, deciding what you think about them, and are you really in that much better of a place from a security perspective after that work?
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing, and I think it's maybe not visible to people, but if you're talking to a vendor who's doing well, I mean, they are getting 30 of those a month, 40, 50 a month, and they're all slightly different, and they're spending headcount that could be making your data more secure on answering questions about if they encrypt data at rest, asked by people who don't realize how cloud systems work and that the system has the key on it that the hackers might get to anyway. And it's not an ideal situation, let's say.
I think that's a really great way of thinking about it, is like the opportunity cost. What could you be using those resources for? What could your vendors be using those resources for? And I don't think we have really stopped to think about how much better we could actually make things versus answering questionnaires.
The status quo and inertia is a very strong force.
It's a powerful force for sure.
Well, thanks a ton for joining. Again, it was amazing having you on. So really enjoyed having you. Thanks again.
Well, thanks for having me, Nate. It was really great to just sit down and chat with you. I've watched a few of your podcast episodes so far. I've loved them. I love the format that you have.
Appreciate that.
And I look forward to seeing how many more of these amazing podcasts that you do. So thank you for letting me just be a tiny little part of it.
Well, thanks again, Mike. And thanks, everybody. Be sure to tune in next week. Thanks for listening to the TPRM Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and share it with a colleague. You can find more insights and resources over at tprmpodcast.com. And until next time, remember, trust nothing, verify most things, and keep building. That's it for this episode of the TPRM Podcast. I'm Nate Lee. Thanks for joining me and my guest today. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, and share the episode with your peers and colleagues. For more resources and insights on building business-aligned security programs and managing vendor security, visit tprmpodcast.com and connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.